Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for training. Today, we're going to be discussing a couple of topics, but the first one is going to be Zillow and their market status of pre-foreclosure. So I have found that one of the first things I need to educate buyers on, and I met some new buyers yesterday. I don't have anything to show them. I don't have any houses to show them, but I did meet them at a house and get to have some of the beginning conversations I need to have educating first-time home buyers. And one of the first topics I want to talk to them about is Realtor.com and Zillow and the home searches that they're going to be doing independent of me. I encourage my buyers to look for properties on their own, check Zillow, check Realtor.com. The primary difference between those two platforms is that Zillow is also going to include for sale by owners. And I make a point during that conversation to let them know that I'm happy to show them for sale by owners. And it just requires me making an appointment with the seller and asking them if they'll pay commission. And that could be a topic for another training session, but I just want to make sure my buyers know that for sale by owners are things I can show them as well. And when I'm on that topic of for sale by owners, I then discuss with them other properties that they may discover on Zillow. And some of those are pre-foreclosures. And pre-foreclosure is a market status that only Zillow uses. That is a Zillow term. And a pre-foreclosure is not a foreclosure. It's not even necessarily a home that will ever become foreclosed, because what pre-foreclosure means is it just means that the homeowner has become late on their mortgage payments. Now, I don't know about y'all, but back during the real estate market crash, there were several times I was late on my mortgage payment. That would have put me, if Zillow had this at the time, that would have put me on the pre-foreclosure list on Zillow. Now, you might be asking yourself why Zillow would even put that up. So first, you need to understand how Zillow makes money. So Zillow makes money across several different revenue streams, one of which is selling leads to real estate agents. So you can pay Zillow for leads. Now, in a market where our inventory is historically low and we have very few houses for sale, Zillow has found a way to create more inventory. And the way they've created more inventory are these pre-foreclosures. So what Zillow's really trying to get is they're trying to get clicks on houses. And when people click that button saying, I'd like more information on this house, or they click on one of the realtors listed on the side panel of that property, then that is a lead Zillow can sell to multiple agents. So with so few houses currently on the market, they would have a hard time filling their lead quota that they have sold to real estate agents. So by introducing pre-foreclosure, which they've had for a long time, by introducing pre-foreclosure, it gives them more inventory. Now, in my opinion, it gives them inventory of houses that they're not available, and they may never become available. And quite frankly, I really do find it to be more of a bait and switch kind of advertisement, because you're not going to be able to show these houses to your buyers. Now, Zillow would probably argue, but they're still providing you a live buyer. So that buyer is still wanting to buy a home. They just won't be able to buy that home. But what I've found is so frustrating is if that is how you're receiving a buyer, and the very first communication you're having with the buyer is that, oh, I'm so sorry, that home actually isn't available. That may rub the buyer the wrong way or feel like they've been tricked. So you're going to have to do a little fancy footwork to make sure that you're building rapport with them on that phone call, and they're not just feeling like you have tricked them into calling you. So pre-foreclosure is not an actual for sale home. They're not usually on the same tab as the search results. They're listed under a secondary tab that's listed it's called something like, other homes. And if you really dig deep and read, you'll see that these are not truly for sale properties. But it gives Zillow the opportunity to sell more leads. So they're not going away. I think we're going to have pre-foreclosure for a long time, unless a lawsuit comes about that, argues that these are not actually houses that are for sale. But for Zillow, the customer is not the buyer and the seller. The customer is the real estate agents. They're trying to sell leads to real estate agents. Now advertising on the Zillow site, the buyers and the sellers are the customer for that. But as far as the listings go, Zillow is free to use for buyers and sellers. So, those buyers are not making Zillow any money when they're on there clicking around, except as inventory. They are lead inventory. Those are hot bodies that can be passed on to a realtor, and the realtor pays a lead fee. So that is what a pre-foreclosure is. I think it's kind of tricky. So what I try to do is I try to explain it to my buyer the first time I meet them. Otherwise, we start this depressing round of them sending me properties from Zillow. Hey, Ashley, did you see this one? Well, yes, that one's not available. Did you see this one? Yes, that one's not available either. And I will tell you, my husband panicked a little when I explained this to him. And he said, you mean if someone just gets a month behind on their mortgage or 2 months behind on their mortgage, they could show up on Zillow as a for sale home? And I said, they kind of will. It should be an additional motivation to pay your mortgage on time so that you don't end up on Zillow. So if anybody has any questions about pre-foreclosure, I'm happy to answer them. It can be very frustrating to buyers. They're feeling the same pinch we're feeling, where there just aren't enough houses for the number of buyers there are. So pre-foreclosure looks promising because it's listed essentially at that Zestimate amount, and the house usually looks in great shape. You know why? Because an owner occupant lives there and is enjoying their home. They just happen to be behind on their mortgage. So anybody have any questions before we move on?
I will say that there have been cases in the past for me where a house just was a perfect fit for my client, and we have watched that property. And you can actually go to, oh my gosh, is it RP? What's it called? RPR. And you can see sometimes there's like a foreclosure date in there, like for an auction at the courthouse or that sort of stuff. So we've actually kind of held on to an address a couple times and just kind of watched the process. And eventually the house did come available. But like Ashley said, it's not very often because all they have to do is make a payment and then they're caught back up. So,
and I just chatted to everybody that RPR is Realtor Property Resource, and that is an NAR, a National Association of Realtors product that is available to all of us. And what it does is it will allow you to look up properties. It'll allow you to do a CMA, a comparative market analysis. And it has just a little bit of a different flavor to it than Flex MLS's CMA. So it does give you a second option for doing CMAs. Now, for a long time, we didn't publicize RPR here in town because there was a large firm in town who was not sharing their stats to RPR. So you couldn't really do a functional CMA from it if one big large firm didn't have any of their listings flowing to that resource. But since about a year ago, they've been participating as well. So now we should have like 99% of the sold data going into RPR for our area. So historically, we just have not used it, because Flex had all of the stats. But I think it's a good source now for us to go check that one out and try to set your CMA apart a little bit. I know right now, listings are very competitive for the listing agents that are being interviewed because it's just the Wild West right now on listings. So, which will lead me to our next portion of the meeting, where I just want to interject a little bit of commiseration time. Let's just complain for just 1 to 2 minutes about this stinking market. There are not enough listings. The poor buyers are getting beat up all over town. A set of my clients tried to get their, let me answer this real quick. Rita's asking, where do they get the information on being behind on payment property? So if you go to CRS tax data on the MLS, which is a member benefit for the Roanoke Valley Association of Realtors members, you will see mortgage history on there. So mortgage history is public record. So because it's public record, Zillow has some sort of giant search engine who's checking mortgage public records, and they're compiling their list of pre-foreclosure, and I'm using that in quote fingers, pre-foreclosure properties. If we're using that as the litmus test, everybody's a pre-foreclosure property unless you own your house outright, because anybody's life can change and they can get behind on their mortgage. But they're using just public records for mortgage information. Yep.
Usually if there is a letter that's been sent or noticed in the newspaper, they'll pull it from that as well.
Because that's part of the legally required notification before you can go into foreclosure. They have to notify you publicly several times in order to make sure you've had every opportunity to bring your mortgage current. So sadly, it is public record, Yep. Okay, moving on. So I had clients who made an offer on their 5th property they're trying to win last night. And the house was listed for $289,950. We went in at $307,000, offered to pay up to $20,000 in additional cash towards any sort of appraisal short. So we knew we were coming in way above asking price, and we knew that there was a possibility the appraisal would come in below our top purchase offer price. So we were willing to pay up to $20,000 in cash to handle any sort of short there. So if we were awarded the bid at $307,000 and the appraisal came in at $302,000, we would bring cash to make up that difference. So we were trying to give a comfort level to the seller that the deal would not fall apart due to a low appraisal. We also waived any and all repairs by the seller. We covered all the inspection fees ourselves and just had a walk away amount of $6,000. If there were defects in excess of $6,000, we could terminate. Otherwise, we were buying this house. And we did not win. There were 5 offers. They turned down a cash offer similar to ours and ended up going with one that was quote unquote way out of the ballpark of everybody else's. So somebody apparently offered just insane money for this house. And that is happening because there are no other houses, So my poor buyers, it's just depressing. And I will say I'm very good at rapport with my clients, but even I am failing to really, truly connect with them over these losses. They are exhausted. They're living in temporary housing, going to see houses hours that, within them going on the market, and we are still not winning. So I feel them pulling away a little, and I don't blame them. This market is brutal. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm communicating well with them. I'm not harassing them, but I'm just trying to stay in touch with them. I'm not even trying to make light of the situation. It is depressing. They are feeling very frustrated. By the same token, yesterday, a new house went on the market yesterday morning, looked awesome. It wasn't for these clients, but I had literally 3 other sets of clients reach out to me to make appointments for yesterday for that one house. I had one house for 3 sets of my clients. So I made appointments for all 3 of them. And then within 3 hours of that house going live on MLS, I spoke with the listing agent and she let me know, oh, I'm so sorry. I have to cancel all 3 of your appointments because the seller's already accepted an offer. So that didn't go well either. And I'm telling you, this is me lickety split on the ball as soon as those houses go on the market. I'm hitting that hot sheet button about 17 times a day. So we're hitting critical mass of low inventory, in my opinion. And the great spring weather is wonderful, but in my opinion, it's bringing more buyers, but not necessarily bringing any more sellers. So we're just going to continue to have this same issue. I was griping briefly because I am human to my best friend last night on the phone. And I was just saying, these wheels only stay in motion when I'm juggling, meaning I can only work as many buyers as I do so long as I'm eventually putting buyers in houses. If I'm never putting buyers in houses and I'm just continuing to collect more buyers, there are physically only a certain number of hours in the day that I can do my job. So it's not working when no one ever ends up in a house, you know? So I don't know what's going to happen. New construction will surely not catch up in time. Lumber prices are through the roof. So I don't even know. Eventually that will heal itself because buyers will just say, I don't care that it's going to cost 15% more. I just need a house. So I think that will sort itself out, even if lumber prices don't go down, especially if interest rates stay low. But it's certainly, I mean, it takes time to build houses. So I'm wondering now if we're starting to really see a crisis in housing coming up. And we may have to be looking at more condos and more quadplexes and some more high density population housing in order to accommodate all of the buyers we have right now. Again, this is just me spitballing on what I think some of our issues are that are contributing to low inventory. My opinions alone, but hopefully that's what you guys tune in for is, you know, me to get out that magic 8 ball and try to figure out what is going on with this market. So I'm sure y'all are all experiencing the same. I don't even pretend to act like this is my experience alone. So it is very frustrating, and sellers truly do just get to pick who and what they want, you know, and lots of buyers are now waiving the appraisal. That they're saying, hey, I've got extra cash. Doesn't matter what the appraisal comes in. I'm going to buy the house anyway. And for your, I would say, more common buyer, which is they have a house to sell first and they have a mortgage they have to get, they're not going to have any luck in this market. So therefore, they're not going to sell their house. They're going to stay in their house because they know they can sell their house, but they're not guaranteed to be able to buy another one. So those sellers who could be bringing their homes to market are now just sitting tight and waiting for this market to level out. Well, it's not going to level out until we have more houses. So that obviously is just a vicious cycle of how we can't get houses on the market because we don't have anywhere for those folks to go. So I'm not sure what's going to break it open, but we'll see. We'll see.
And I'll chime in as well. Everybody knows my good friend is an appraiser here, her and her husband both here locally. And they're hating it just as much as we are. She's only working for one vendor where they normally work for about 4 different vendors. And her orders went from 3 orders to the week to 15 orders in a few hours. So I think we're going to see appraisals taking longer to get done just because the amount that's needed for refis, new purchases is just so great that I think we're going to start seeing a delay. And I know back in the day, we would always put that appraiser off until inspections were done. But I'm thinking that that's going to have to change because there's not going to be time to get that appraiser to get out there and get the appraisal done. They're really struggling.
They are. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And it's a thankless job, quite frankly.
Oh, nobody likes them.
No.
Unless they're way over. And quite frankly, we just had a discussion yesterday about that. And this one particular house, there was $100,000 span between the comps. And she's like, what do I do? I could give them anything they want because the comp supported that big of a span. Mm-hmm. So they're really having a hard time figuring all that out with the way that the market is.
And they remember that they were the scapegoat
before.
That's right.
Yeah.
No one was blaming people taking advantage of the situation or lenders just making loans to anybody and everybody.
Right.
They all blamed the appraisers for those high values. Yep.
Which is pretty crazy. They just refinanced their house and they did not need an appraisal on their house, which she was shocked. And she's like, I took advantage of refi-ing. I took advantage of them just using the value they came up with whatever algorithm that they use, but it was way higher than she would think that her house would appraise for. So it's making me wonder, okay, are people doing cash out loans and things like that? Or is this causing more of an issue when they are not doing the appraisals? They're just doing their own valuation.
Well, and I had a family member do a refinance, and because it was a non-cash out refi, there wasn't an appraisal required because they weren't going to actually be cashing any of that cash out. They were
Right.
essentially just redoing their mortgage with the lower interest rate.
And that's what they did. They did a 15-year at like 2 point something. I don't remember
Crazy.
exactly what it
Right,
was, but
right. This family member was 2.5 because it was a no cash out. The interest rate's a little higher when you're cashing out, but
right.
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. Okay. So any questions about that, or anybody care to commiserate and share as well? I've got another, horror story to tell you in a moment, but just jump in if you have anything to add. So the next thing I want to talk about is an additional inspection. So we're going to talk about camera line inspections, and this is sending the camera line down the sewer line to check the condition of the sewer line. So I would say 10 years ago, no one was doing these. This was not on anyone's radar. But there was a time when radon wasn't on anyone's radar. So these inspections tend to bubble up to the surface when there are problems. So I personally have been recommending a camera line inspection to my buyers for a few years now. But the house, in my opinion, has to meet a certain criteria. I'm not going to obviously do it on anything that has been built in the last 20 years, because presumably nothing catastrophic has happened to that sewer line and it was built with more modern materials. But if that home is 50, 75, 100 years old, it's a pretty good guess that that sewer line is going to be terracotta, or sometimes it's even like a clay paper assemblage. Could be cast iron, and there could be tree root intrusion, but there could also just be degradation due to age. So I had some clients who wrote an offer. It was accepted. We did the same sort of language I just explained to you, where we were not expecting the seller to accommodate any repairs or be burdened with any repairs. However, we did state that if the material defects discovered during the course of inspections was in excess of X dollars, we could terminate the contract. So essentially, we're not expecting the seller to repair anything, but I had a threshold at which my buyers could walk away if we discovered any catastrophic defects. Well, that was fine until we had the camera line inspection. And the camera line inspection, which comes with photos, revealed that the old terracotta sewer line was completely collapsed outside of the home. Now, the sellers were very surprised. It's just two people living in the home. They had not noticed anything awry. But what I said to my buyers is two people living in that home and their water usage may not be creating any issues. But let my family of 7 move in there, and you're going to know in 48 hours, when we're running 2 loads of laundry every day and numerous showers, teenagers taking showers, you're going to know pretty quickly that that sewer line is not draining properly. So even though the sellers were not aware of it, that camera line inspection really did protect my buyers. We ultimately ended up terminating the contract. We got competing estimates for replacing the sewer line, which was going to be necessary, of $12,000 and $7,000. So part of the issue was that the housing there in that area of town is very close together. So that meant that there was not going to be any big machinery going in there to take care of any of this. Instead, we were going to have a plumber doing all hand digging out there. It was going to require the heat pump to be disconnected, moved, and then moved back into place after the sewer line was replaced. It just became too enormous of a project for my buyers to want to continue moving forward. Now, we felt terrible terminating, because now we've stuck this seller with a material defect that is now discovered. Now, that's the whole point of the inspections. And that protection clause I put in functioned the way it was intended, which is if we find a catastrophic defect, then the buyers are not stuck purchasing the property. But sadly, we've now stuck this seller with a defect. Now, I'll remind you that in the state of Virginia, we are a buyer beware state. So the seller has no obligation whatsoever to disclose this, even though they know it now. Now, they can't hide it or lie about it. And I would argue banning a future camera line inspection could be construed as hiding it. So if someone wrote into the contract, a future contract, we'd like to have a camera line inspection, and that they counteroffered and said, no, we don't want to do a camera line inspection, I would argue that could be construed as hiding a defect. Okay. That would be some precarious legal position to be in as the seller. Now, if someone submits a future offer and doesn't ask for a camera line inspection, I don't believe the seller has an obligation to say, hey, would you wink, wink, nudge, nudge, maybe like to have a camera line inspection? I don't think they're obligated to do that. They're not obligated to help the buyer discover things. They just can't hide it or lie about it. Okay. Now, that is the seller's obligations regarding material adverse facts. The listing agent, as you all know, has a higher threshold for disclosure. And that means because we are realtors, because we have a code of ethics, we have to disclose material adverse facts we know no later than an offer being presented. So that's why you'll see in private remarks sections, basement gets trickle of water during heavy prolonged rains. That is a listing agent who has an actual knowledge about a material adverse fact, and they are making sure they're disclosing that up front. Now, they're not required to disclose it in the private remarks. And sometimes I get irritated agents calling me saying, we're finding out 3 weeks into this. We've been back and forth about maybe bringing an offer, and now they're just now telling us that the basement gets water. Shouldn't they have had that in the MLS? Well, they're not required to have it in the MLS. It doesn't have to be there. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. They just have to make the disclosure prior to receiving the offer. So is it probably best to put it in the private remarks? Yes. But if it's something that's going to stigmatize the property to the point where people won't even come and see it, then I would argue that's probably not in your seller's best interest. So it's always a personal decision for the agent as to when and how to disclose material adverse facts. I will ask you to always disclose them in writing. So a quick email that says, hey, just a couple of details about the property. And listen, human nature, make sure you mention some good facts about the property as well in the email. Please don't just send them a bullet list of 10 material adverse facts that you know about. So in this case, with the sewer line issue, that seller now has no additional obligation for disclosure, except not to hide it and not to lie about it. But what I feel terrible about is the poor listing agent is now stuck. The listing agent now knows and has seen photos of a collapsed terracotta sewer line. So that agent now has an obligation to disclose this. So the listing agent's only two choices are disclose and tell every potential buyer about it prior to offer writing. Or say to the seller, we either have to fix it or you have to fire me and my whole firm, and you need to go with a different firm and list the property again. And that listing agent will not have a disclosure obligation unless you tell them about the sewer line. Now, morally, does that line up with how I like to do life? No. I am the type of seller who would fix it, even though it's $7,000, because I'm just not going to pass my problem off to someone else, or I'm at least going to disclose it and let the buyers decide whether they want to handle that or not. So that's not my decision, though. I'm not the seller. So as the listing agent, it's my obligation just to let the sellers know what their choices are. And one of the choices is, seller, I will allow you to terminate and move on to another firm and not have this disclosure obligation if you wish. Now, keep in mind, seller, if I have a buyer who wants to come see this property, I know about this material adverse fact. It does not fall under confidentiality because I am burdened by the state of Virginia to disclose those facts, okay? Now, I'm not going to go out and slander the seller and tell everybody in town or put it on Facebook because that's not cool. But if I have a buyer who wants to go see that property in the future, I am going to have to disclose that to the buyer. Okay. And Rita's asking, can the listing agent raise the list price and offer it as a rebate to the buyer? Yes and no. So absolutely, they could raise the price and say, hey, we're having the entire sewer line replaced. And perhaps they'll find a plumber who's willing to be paid at closing. Probably not. But they could offer to do that and make it part of the transaction with the buyer. And the buyer would be buying at a higher price, which is a higher mortgage amount, but they would end up with a new sewer line. The tricky bit is going to be lenders will not allow them to receive any cash. So what would have to happen is at the closing, the plumber who's going to do the work would be paid at closing out of the seller proceeds. And of course, the seller proceeds are going to be $7,000 higher than they would be, or $5,000 or whatever you guys have negotiated, because you're building in that repair. The problem is going to be that means that that work is going to be completed post-closing. And as a buyer's agent, I'm probably not cool with that getting completed post-closing. What if they get digging in there and there's something else wrong, or they discover another problem, or there has to be a new connection at the street, and there's a $1,500 connection fee. There could just be some unforeseen extra hurdles that now are happening while your buyer owns the property rather than when the seller owns the property. So this is probably a repair I would rather see completed prior to closing. However, it just gets tricky since buyers who are getting mortgages can't receive cash. And plumbers like to be paid. I don't blame them, so they don't particularly want to put in a $7,000 new sewer line and then wait 3 weeks to get paid. So that was a great question. Anybody have any other questions about how any of that would work? You can extrapolate this out to roof full of leaks or HVAC unit that isn't working, or those are all things that could come up and create these issues. Okay. Disclosure items are going to come up. We have an agent at the firm who just went through a transaction, and the seller putting it on the market really didn't want to make any repairs or address any issues. And then, it doesn't take a magic 8 ball to understand that then a buyer had inspections and discovered a whole lot of things wrong. And the seller still did not necessarily want to make repairs. So they issued the repair remediation limit in clause 17 in lieu of addressing repairs. And the buyer said, no, thank you. And the buyer terminated and walked away. That left our listing agent with a laundry list of material adverse facts. Some as simple as, just a double tap in the breaker, or, a junction box needing to be installed on some live wire connections, things that could be remedied easily, but the sellers have moved. The sellers don't want to address those. And so our listing agent had to give them the choices, and the seller opted to terminate their listing agreement with us. Now, I will caution you that makes it sound like it's easy for us to terminate a listing agreement. It's not. Listing agreements are bilateral contracts. That means that the seller and the listing firm both have to agree to terminate the listing agreement. If you're unhappy with your seller, you cannot just terminate your listing agreement. There has to be an actual breach of contract to give us, the listing firm, a termination right when it comes to a listing agreement. And of course, obviously, this does not happen very often. But I'll tell you, I have reviewed it recently, and there are very few ways in which a seller can breach that listing agreement. So just because you're having a seller who's not cooperating well with you does not necessarily mean you can fire your seller. So these are conversations you should be having with me if you do have concerns, or you do think perhaps your seller is in breach of contract. But in this case, we gave the seller the option. We said, listen, we understand we're tying your hands with these disclosure obligations, that you now either have to fix them or you really have to find a new listing firm. And that's because I am the broker. I have knowledge of each and every transaction at the whole firm. So even though Stevie maybe had the listing and now Donna's going to have the listing, that does not relieve Donna of the disclosure obligations, because the firm has the disclosure obligations. So they are now we did go ahead and terminate the listing, and they're going to list with a different firm. I'll be interested to see in this market how quickly that house sells, and if it goes all the way through to closing or not. Because obviously these are discoveries that anyone's going to make. So it's going to become an issue again. But the market's even hotter now than it was when that one was happening. So maybe it won't be an issue. Maybe they'll make even more money. Who knows? I hope so, for their sake. All right, who has questions about that? You guys are on it this morning. All right. So we're going to move on to our last topic today, which is vendor lists. This is something that I think you should be curating for yourself. We are covered up more and more now with out of town buyers. So people are moving to our area. They're transferring in for work. They're transferring here for our outdoor opportunities. You know, a lot of people have gone through the pandemic and thought, I'm now walking every day and I am tired of my town not having sidewalks or not having walking trails. So they're moving to Roanoke for our greenways and our outdoor opportunities and our outdoor festivals and outdoor music events. So we're getting more and more out of town clients. And they really are going to look to us for plumbers, electricians, window people, vinyl siding companies, mechanics, car mechanics. They don't know anyone here. So please take time to curate your own vendor list that you would be willing to share with your clients. Now, of course, you're going to explain to them that these are only people you have used and you had a good experience with them, but you can't guarantee that will be their experience. But you have had a good working relationship with these vendors and you would recommend them. And have that at the ready so that, I was going over a home inspection report this morning with some clients, and there's going to need to be some brick repointing. Well, these folks are from out of town. They have no idea who to hire for brick repointing, right? So they're looking to me for that resource, and I'm happy to provide that. Same with moving companies and anyone related to the actual transaction. But then even beyond that, I have a past client who I was able to recommend a landscape architect to, and she has had lots of work done on her property. It's looking amazing, and she is so pleased with that relationship. She came here not knowing anyone. She didn't know who she could trust. She didn't know who would do a great job in her yard and that she would trust to have coming over and mowing and doing plantings and some erosion prevention on the back hill at her property. And so by providing that resource, it just provides more service to my buyer. And it does actually extend that relationship. She begins to look to me as not just the real estate contact for the area, but just a resources person for her. And I'm happy to provide that. It will continue to have her use me, and it will continue to have her refer people to me. Okay. All right. Any questions on that? That's our last topic for today. 45 minutes went real fast.